All right. Well, we're here at the 2 minute grace period mark. Welcome to Triton Data Center office hours for March 14th. Um, and you see the title there, Back to Basics. The reason I wanted to just kind of go over, and we may have discussed some of this before, but I wanted to do it again because we've had a lot of newcomers join Discord. We have a lot of people joining, IRC and other Reddit, all those things, the community. And there's been some questions about certain things, and I just wanted to kind of go back and highlight some of the things that we do have. I mean, we've heard comments about maybe some things are missing in documentation, or there's things we can add, and definitely we want to continue to improve and add to documentation. But I do want to highlight what is there, because I personally have asked questions and realized, okay, it's actually here in this documentation. And sometimes Google isn't your friend when it comes to this, because you Google SmartOS and it'll bring up Oracle pages and things like that. And so sometimes Google, like I said, is not your friend when it comes to finding some of the information you need. And just after reviewing SmartOS, docs.smartos.org, docs.triton.datacenter.com, there is pages. It's almost like kind of like a book. You actually do want to read it from starting at page one to the next page. And sometimes, I'm just speaking from my personal experience, I like to jump around and find stuff. But sometimes when it comes to like specifically like installing Triton or SmartOS, starting from page one and just going in numerical order seems to work really well. And there's some cool things on there, like I'll talk about this a little bit, but like on the SmartOS getting started page, there's an ASCII cast, thank you, Brian, of getting a SmartOS installation up and running. So just a quick overview. SmartOS, Illumos Space Type 1 Hypervisor OS runs in memory and boots from USB, ISO, Pixie Boot, or from a zpool. So when you download it, you can choose the format of the USB image or the ISO. And then for Pixie Boot, there's a couple different options for that, including I can't remember the service's name, but you can put a URL in there and have it boot from Pixie, even on different things such as like VirtualBox, or if you're doing something like Equinix Metal, right?
Yeah,
Utilize
we have a NetBoot server,
NetBoot. That's what it's
and
called.
so if you like boot iPixie and point it at our iPixie config file, it'll chain load everything else and boot straight into SmartOS. You can also use netboot.xyz, and we've got an entry in there with a selection of platform images available.
Yeah, netboot.xyz is a pretty cool tool. I've used it quite a bit on some of my virtual machines and things like that, just to test that out. And it's interesting because I actually had a hard time finding it, but it will, like for instance, if you run on like a ARM architecture, right? It will not. It detects that, so it won't show you unsupported operating
Right.
systems.
Yeah.
So I was like, I can't find it, and I was like, I realized what I was setting up was a ARM virtual machine, so it'll only show me supported OSs, and so I couldn't find SmartOS. You need to make sure you have x86 virtualization enabled. So, but yeah, SmartOS is in there as an option, so you don't even have to download anything else. You can just make a NetBoot USB stick, and as long as you have connectivity, you can pop that into a machine and get going. It utilizes Beehive and KVM for hardware virtualization, Crossbow, ZFS, dtrace, all the goodies, and then package source for management. It follows a local storage architecture, right? So we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but it encourages using disk that's connected to and the motherboard HBA card, right? It's not compared to like something like an iSCSI or SAN, right? It's all about having the storage local to the VM.
Mhm.
So, but we are looking forward to having more support for those types of architecture in Triton potentially, because we do understand that a lot of people have made that choice, and they're not going to just rip all of it out, and that's and we respect that, and so We'd like to get some more interoperability with that, and we'll talk about that at another
Yeah,
time. But yeah,
Triton was developed by folks that were ex Sun Microsystems in the storage appliance group. So they actually developed the Sun 7000 storage series, and they know all the horror stories about network-based storage. And so when they developed Triton, they wanted to avoid network-based storage entirely. Um, but we get that, that's something that people have an investment in.
yeah,
Um, and while we don't prefer it, there's a lot of known disaster cases with it. Um,
yeah,
it's something that we're looking at ways that we might be able to utilize that. So,
yeah. For instance, your SAN goes down and all your VMs are gone, right? And versus like if you have your instances spread across, and this would be on Triton, you have it spread across a couple compute nodes. A compute node goes down. Yeah, those instances are down, but not every single machine would be down if you're using like a SAN that's the storage for all of your systems. And then of course there's speed considerations too, right? You have some limitations, over network and fiber channel, things like that. There's a single point of failure there and a single bottleneck of bandwidth. So those are just some things that local storage has a leg up on that. But like I said, there's room for mixed architectures, I would say, where you can do
yeah,
some of both. And then SmartOS empowers Triton DataCenter, and that's the head node, compute node combination of SmartOS, right? So SmartOS is the operating system, and then Triton DataCenter is basically like an orchestration where it helps manage where your instances are placed, networking, and of course it gives like an operator and user consumption page. So basically it's like Lego pieces put together. You have this nice set of controls and APIs to manage where your VMs and zones will go. And getting started with SmartOS. So one of the things too is I'll break down some of these slides as far as like uploading them just for the links, and I'll put some of this in the description too after I upload and put the timestamps in. But I have a bunch of links that are really good, and so that's why I want to make sure I share those with everybody. But yeah, as we discussed, the way it can be installed to a zpool, bare metal cloud and used in a VM, so you can use it if you want to test it out. You don't have a machine free, you can use it in a VM. In fact, VirtualBox even has an option for Illumos now, so kind of funny because Oracle runs that. But yeah, there's a whole, you can type in like because I think on the guide now for installing it in VirtualBox, it'll say pick Solaris as the OS. You can actually select that and select Illumos now, so it knows how to have support for Illumos-based distros right in VirtualBox. And unfortunately, VirtualBox doesn't work very well on the ARM architecture. There's like, I think, some betas, but I've never been able to get it to work. But luckily, I have a spare Intel, like the last Intel Mac kind of generation, and I'm able to do my VMs there. Cloud options include MNX.io, so our own cloud. Equinix Metal is a place you can install it. You can do Triton there as well, but you can just do SmartOS. Spearhead is another. They're in Romania. They have a Triton-based cloud as well, so you can spin up instances if you need something in the EU. And then the things I wanted to highlight: docs.smartos.org, the SmartOS Quick Start Guide. That was the ASCII cast I was talking about. So it gives you all the right instructions on how to not only just get it installed, but create a zone and install software. The ASCII cast is really cool because it's a video, but you're able to actually copy text from it. So, if you're looking for like, oh, I need this command, you don't have to like, you could just look at the ASCII cast and copy stuff and pause it and kind of follow along that way. So that's really neat. I like that. The Linux to SmartOS cheat sheet. So I've talked about this before, but very handy guide that gives you common commands a lot of the commands I think are the same in SmartOS. Like there's a lot of commands because they are, um, either GNU based or um, they're just the same name. They don't run exactly, but they do pretty much the same thing in
Some of
SmartOS.
this goes back to the old days of BS. A lot of
Yeah,
these go back to the days of ancient Unix where it's all just there everywhere.
yeah,
And then
Yeah.
some are Unix, or sorry, Sys5 versus BSD splits. And then some are introduced by further GNU-isms. So
yeah.
depending on where the difference is or where the differences aren't is telling in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and especially because there's a lot of people who just like your fingers just kind of do automatically sometimes things right that you're used to. Um, so the cheat sheet will just give you like you type a command doesn't work, you're like what that does that's so there's also the ability to look that up. And then um, with package source there may be stuff that you can install depending on the type of software, but there's things you can install. So for instance, I'm a noob and I use Nano. um, you can install Nano from package source right away, and so your tools can a lot of tools are available on SmartOS that you might want to use. um, but I am trying to learn Vim. I'm putting the key bindings in VS Code to get better at it because it is really efficient, and or Emacs, whatever your choice is. I don't hate. I say if you can get the work done, get it done. But the advantages is Vim is usually available on most machines without an install. We've talked about in the last office hours the upcoming web GUI for standalone SmartOS. And I put parentheses. Triton has an operator, and with support, you can have a user portal. So the web GUI is really for like a single SmartOS installation, because we had some questions come up. Where will there be clustering and things like that, and that's where Triton would come in and take that place. So the web GUI is really for a standalone installation, but it's to help you get up and running really quick, guide you through that quick start guide kind of, because I know some people, it can be a little jarring just to have just a CLI and JSON, and the web GUI really kind of will give a nice kind of front for you to work there. And then docs.smartos.org, mailing lists, and IRC. That's going to have all the chat, mailing list, social network info. It has the Discord link. So if you're trying to find something out and you want to ask on a mailing list or IRC, or if you're on this Discord, you could share this page, the mailing list and IRC, with somebody, and they're going to be able to find every place that we are present, and then you'll find people out in the community, other developers at other companies who still work on Illumos, or there's a lot of Oxide folks who previously worked at Joyent and worked on SmartOS, and they answer questions as well, and still work on Illumos. So there's quite a bit of community participation, which is great. And then just using SmartOS, so additional software is installed via source, package source, or piping something into
Not
sudo
via
bash.
source usually. Or
Oh,
well, I
oh
mean, you can
yeah,
do source on your own.
right. That's what I
Okay.
mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I just
Okay.
meant like
Okay.
don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do that if you want to compile something. Go ahead, but package source is
Right.
the best way, right? Um, there is probably I jokingly kind of mentioned the bash scripts because you throw caution to the wind when you find a command and it says pipe this into sudo bash. You're just letting it install whatever it wants. So
Yeah.
I don't always recommend doing that, especially, but if you trust it, I guess. But package source is going to be the best way to quickly get software installed and to the right places and things like that. So I put that link there.
Yeah,
Like, oh, go ahead.
I saw Jonathan mentioned we surpassed 26,000 packages in package source now, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Package source has a
Nice.
comparable list of packages with like Debian. Um, so like Debian, like in the Linux side, Debian is widely known as having the largest repository of open source packages just available in the package manager. And we're pretty close. We're pretty on par with Debian. Some of the things they do, like Apache 2, right? There will be like Apache 2, like this variant, this variant, this variant. So they have some extra packages in there just by raw package count, that where like these 9 packages would equate to a single package on our side. But yeah, we're very on par. So pretty much anything that is commonly packaged for open source systems, it's almost always there and available. So
Yeah, and thank you to Jonathan for his work on that. Like for instance, we wanted two-factor authentication for SSH, and Brian helped me with that. It was Google. It was like Google's GitHub repository. You compile it and do all this, and it works, but it's a lot easier and a lot and it covers the dependencies and package source. We asked him to get it in there, and we got it in there. So, if there's sometimes there's software, you can always ask, can this be in package source? And there's many tools that have been added because of that. And so package source is, just like if you're using apt or yum, it's basically your go-to for getting software installed. So, and I mean, I used, like I said, I get a machine. The first thing I do, install a couple of packages, unless I've kind of templated it out, but, install my Nano, install the latest version of Apache, things like that. So package source, once you get to, if you've used a package manager before, like I said, like, yum or apt, you'll definitely have a great time using package source because it works in a very similar way. There's a few differences, but works just like every other packaging tool that you may have used. And then images for creating instances can be imported from images.smartos.org with the image ADM tool. Examples include SmartOS, of course, Beehive hardware VM images, so Ubuntu, Debian, Rocky, Elma, and that also includes if you are still using on like KVM, if you have the supported hardware for that, and then LX images. So those are the Linux instances that are running on the software virtualization of LX. It uses a syscall translation layer, and that's most of the Linux distros are available on that. And then just to note on the LX images, right? As we talk about the cheat sheet guide, certain commands you do need to use like the native folder. So some of the things like networking and things like that, you actually would use the SmartOS tool under the native folder to actually do some of the configuration. But that's noted, and if there's
we do simulate some of the output of the Linux binaries. So like if config and the IP command, those are going to work. Route is going to work. But if you're trying to like modify your networking configuration, or you're trying to modify your routing, you're going to have to use native commands for that. And we don't support NetFilter because like that's a gigantic beast in and of itself. So you can use if you're in Triton, we've got Cloud Firewall. If you're on standalone SmartOS, there's FWADM for setting up firewall rules for instances that are enforced by the global zone. So there's some alternate options there.
Yeah. And so with LX, you just might try a tool and you might get some weird output or something, and you're like, okay, now you need to go and use the native tool. But like you said, it's not everything. And so most of the software, when you get to LX image, you just go ahead and use the particular package manager. So you're on Ubuntu or Debian, you use apt, install it, and it's going to work, right? So when I get an LX image, I go in and I put apt install nano. It just works. Instances can be provisioned using the CLI with a JSON manifest, or like I said, the upcoming web GUI. We had some questions on that earlier in the chat. When is it going to be released? We're still working on that, but we have been discussing, like an open kind of beta test. So I'll try to.
It's getting very close.
Yeah, it's very close.
I'll say that.
Yeah. So I'll reach out to. I'll work with Travis on reaching out to folks who have shown interest in trying to get those bits in your hands and to help us report back and give feedback. So as they're chopping at the bit, I understand. So we'll work hard to try to get that for you, because it is really cool. We just we're doing some review of it, and obviously we want it to be. It's not going to be perfect on GA, but we want it to be as great as it can be for the first release.
We want to make sure that we're not delivering something that is like broken right off the bat. Like everything that we intend for it to do right now should work. But there may be edge cases that people run into, especially like SmartOS is much more open with what you can do. And Triton is much more like on rails. There's much less variant in random kinds of things that people might be doing. And so there may be stuff that, people are doing with their things that we didn't account for, and we had some of that stuff early on where I had something, a certain way, and, other people, like UI was working fine. I'm like, I just ran it and it crashes. I don't know what's going on. And we've, traced it back to something that I was doing. And I was like, okay, yeah, we need to, that's a thing that we need to allow for people to do. So there could be some things like that we haven't figured out yet, that we need to make sure that those things are compatible. But I think there's just a couple more things that we want to make sure that we have tweaked correctly before we're ready for some other people to start using it.
Yeah, I will just mention too that the cool thing is that in the web GUI, you can actually, when you build your machine, it actually gives you a JSON file. So you can save that or use that in the future if you want to like provision using the CLI, and it lets you edit and change things in that JSON file right in the web GUI too. So it's basically a visual representation of what you're doing, but you can go in and add and remove things from the JSON file and it has a validation thing, so it'll help you. It has some guide rails to help you make sure you do things that are compatible. So it's pretty cool that way. Services are managed via SMF. So, just like you might be used to on Linux, services, like when you have, daemons and things like that, that's managed via SMF. There's a great guide on that. It does use XML to create a service. So that guide will show you how to create a service if you need to. And those are great for things that you want to have persist, like on boot and things like that. So SMF is great for that. And then I just want to mention SMB and NFS are supported. And it says NFS can only be served from the global zone, but SMB can be used in non-global zones. And
that's not true anymore. NFS can be served from non-global zones now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll need to. That's something I'll put a note. We need to update in the docs. Then.
Yeah. Please fix that. Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah.
That's on the page. So I want to make sure that's now that
okay.
That we'll get that fixed.
Yeah.
In the documentation, because somebody might read that, and that's what happened to me. But I should have known better. But yeah, I'll make sure that gets fixed. So I'll change that. So yeah, that's the other thing too, is I do want to make sure, as we add features. So for instance, when the web GUI comes out and things like that, I'm sure we're going to have more documentation surrounding that, and that'll allow us to also update some things which may be outdated there on the SmartOS docs page, because I've been updating a lot of Triton DataCenter.com docs, but we definitely want to make sure the SmartOS docs are also up to date. So forget that.
Yeah, I overhauled the SmartOS docs about a year ago, and so a lot of that stuff was refreshed.
Yeah,
but I mean, I couldn't hit every page on it. So
of course.
Yeah, there's still occasionally there's some stuff that's a little bit out of date.
Okay. So
which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, I'll work with I think I have access to that, so I'll work with you on I can update where I can and make sure things are changed, because I like to have updated docs, but a lot of stuff is still pretty much true. It's not like it's there's been like a complete thing removed or some huge feature that's not on there. It should be pretty much up to date.
Yeah.
And then I just have a little bit. I just copy this from the docs page. But administering the global zone talks about how it's a live OS. So there's some things you might not know as a first time user of SmartOS when you're doing like USB booting and like how to persist certain things. So using SMF to persist services. And like it says there, you can introduce persistent customization to SmartOS using that. USB key where you can apply things on boot. So, the shadow file for passwords, root access, and the SSH directory is linked to that. So your SSH configuration and keys, you could have those on your USB key. And then, diskless booting provides a lot of advantages, but enforces those constraints. So, especially on the global zone. And that's why I wanted to make sure I mentioned the USB key stuff, because I think that might be confusing for some people when they first get started.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, especially because you don't need it anymore. You could boot off disk.
Right.
It's just the USB key functionality now exists in a very specific ZFS data set.
Right.
Yeah.
So
just wanted to make sure that was clear.
The same things kind of apply, but it's a different. It's on if you have it installed on disk. But
you still get the RAM disk root.
Yeah, SmartOS always runs from an immutable live image. That image can be read over the network through iPXE, off of an ISO, off of a USB, or off of a local Z pool. But in any case, you are always running an immutable live image from a RAM disk.
Yeah, and then the other thing I wanted to mention was config management tools. So, for instance, Ansible. And a great thing about Ansible is no additional software is needed to be on the target machine on SmartOS, because Python is usually on there unless you choose to remove it or something. And then shell commands can also be used. So if you can type it, it can be done and automated through Ansible. In fact, that's been great for me because, for instance, PHP and Apache, I was given an Ansible file and I'm able to customize that and just say I get my SmartOS image up and I'm able to install a bunch of software like Node.js, whatever I need, using Ansible. And so I can repeat that configuration if I have multiple SmartOS machines, or for instance, I'm doing something in a VM and I'm doing something in MNX.io cloud. I can just change the targets there. There's different ways to do that. IP address. If you have CNS enabled, you can use those to target it. And so it's really cool being able to use Ansible because it's very widely used. There's a lot of documentation on it, very well supported, and it just works on a lot of different systems, including SmartOS, or if you're doing Linux and LX or Beehive Linux, Ansible also works there. So you can have your SmartOS and your Linux playbooks side by side and be able to get the configuration or get to where you need to be using those tools. And so, I think we use Ansible playbooks for various things ourselves. So, and then Terraform as well, as we saw in the Discord chat, PTR Peter has been posting some of his Terraform stuff that he's been using, which is great. So there's some community love for using Terraform. He's also was using Terraform Docker. So that's for Triton mostly, as the Docker API is on there. But in Triton, if you're using the Docker API, you could use Terraform as well with the Docker plugin to provision Docker instances as well. Kind of just a repeat of a little bit of what I just showed, but because I'm going to be posting these, I just wanted to show some of the contents of USB key, and then, as we mentioned, you can also install this to Zpool, so you can have this on disk. But it just talks a little bit about some of the things that would persist. So that's just one of the basics I wanted to show. And then documentation references. These are all the things that I have that I looked through on docs.smartos.org. I'm going to post these links. there's a lot of great stuff that'll help you get what you need to do. It's really, really thorough, I believe. And the technical FAQs have a bunch of other great things in them as well, beyond just what the basics are. So if you're wanting to go to the next step, that's a great place to look. Like I said, I'll post these links. They are all available on the left-hand menu on docs.smartos.org. So please look in there. Like I said, Google can sometimes not be your friend, because even when you type in SmartOS and something, it will take you to an Oracle page or some other thing that might have a similar name. So sticking within docs.smartos.org, and then for Triton, docs.tritondatacenter.com is really your best bet. Although, if you do run into some sort of outside issue, sometimes you can find stuff and answers on the mailing list, as like I did the other day for hypervisor turned off, right? Like we got a Beehive capable false, and after a sysinfo command, I was able to just look that up. There was a mailing list thread. Somebody's like, you have virtualization turned off. That's probably the issue. Boom, that was it. So it can be your friend. Just know that if it brings up Oracle stuff, it does that sometimes. But I hope to improve our SEO somehow. But Google's a magic black box, so we'll keep begging.
And do not, under any circumstances, trust ChatGPT on anything about SmartOS especially, but Illumos in general. It will lie to you and tell you that the sky is plaid and swear that it's the truth. It has no idea about any of this stuff. And
they didn't give us any training data, apparently.
Yeah, and it's impossible to fix too, which is one of the most maddening things about this whole like LLM stuff, that people want to believe is like the supreme intelligence. Like very far from it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've used ChatGPT recently to do I was just testing out like Node and like Express, like, hey, make me an application with these endpoints and this functionality, and it works pretty well. It's pretty cool. But yeah, there's obviously some limitations, especially when there's data out there that it apparently hasn't scraped. I think we were...
Yeah, and when you, like, it can do some basic stuff like that, but as I've said many times, if you're doing anything that's interesting or novel, ChatGPT is going to break down very quickly, and it's not going to be able to help you with those things. So, like, it can do some, like, very basic scaffolding stuff, but beyond that, like, it's going to start getting very bad very quickly.
Yeah, and then I posted the other day that it said that Joyent had end-of-life Triton data center altogether, or Samsung had or something, yeah. And I was like, that is not true. So yes, you cannot trust ChatGPT with everything. It does some really cool things, but it obviously has some limitations, and that the limitation is what data it scraped. And if it scrapes some false rumor, it might believe that it's true. So it's not end of life. We're still supporting it, and it's no longer in Samsung or Joyent's hands. And then, so the next step after SmartOS, right, is Triton Data Center. So complete cloud management solution for server, network virtualization, operations, and customer self-service. So that would be, you get it set up and you're able to provide the cloud as for consumption. So they can either use the customer portal, or you give people API access. They can use the Node Triton tool, or the older SDC tool, and they're able to spin up their own instances based on limitations or guardrails that you set for them. But as an operator, you have a lot of options as well. And it consists of the following components: the operations portal, as I mentioned, a public API for provisioning and managing instances, and then a set of private APIs for use by operators. So there's a bunch of SDC commands that are available for the operator only. So things like the network API and VM API, right? Oh, sorry.
And those internal APIs are how Triton itself gets everything done. So if you can't do it through those APIs, then you can do anything through those APIs that Triton itself can do. So there's no restriction there, and you can even do things there where like Triton wouldn't ordinarily let something be done. So you can it is possible to go in and like get yourself in trouble if you're doing something in one place and not in the other place. But generally that kind of thing is for helping out if like a user somehow got themselves wedged a certain way and you need to fix something. But they're all there for that kind of thing. You can do like provisioning through, you can create users, you can like run reports of all kinds. So it's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of it's in the admin UI too, right? So there's a lot of things you can do just from that operations portal. And then of course if you want,
another thing I'd like to mention about Triton before we get too much further along is we have a lot of new users trying out Triton for the first time. And just, if that's going to be you, take advantage of our team. Even if you're going to just use the open source version, we would love to make sure you get started on the right foot because it's a different world sometimes if you're coming from maybe a VMware or something else. And so any way that we can help you get started in that world, first of all, is probably going to give you a much better vision or view of what Triton is capable of. So, test it, play around with it, but don't hesitate to reach out to us and let you walk through some of the specifics or help you get it implemented.
Yeah, and that's why that was one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of go quote unquote back to basics too, is that I've seen some questions and people getting started, and it's it's an opportunity for us as well to potentially clarify things in documentation or maybe augment the documentation just to make it more clear. As I understand, not everybody's going to read the same way or understand some stuff the same way, but I do want to make it as widely available as possible. And so just wanted to kind of touch on these things, but I do check the Discord. We're on there, pretty often, and I'm looking at what people are working on and stuff like that because it's very interesting. And so I do see some new users, and they have run into some issues, so I want to be able to help guide them. And then if they do have feedback as well, we can't change every single page, but we can work on making things easier to use in some cases in documentation. There may just be something that can be written a different way that I think would make it easier for somebody to understand. And an example is like the DNS names. I think some of the things still had like joint.com and stuff like that. So there's little things here and there that I think I could go back and change to just say like, this is not, don't actually copy this one for one, put your own thing in here or something like that. Mm-hmm. So, there's a few opportunities I think for myself to help get this in more people's hands and be able to understand the documentation.
Yeah. It's hard scrubbing all that information because in some cases, the name joint is embedded in the product itself.
Yeah.
Like creating a SmartOS zone is a joint brand zone. And some of the metadata used internally for certain types of specialty zones, like a NAT zone or an NFS zone, have like the joint keyword is like embedded as a specific signifier. And we can't just like rip those things out of the product. Uname -S, for example, still says Sun OS, even though we're quite a bit removed from Sun these days. Changing those things would cause a lot of cascading issues. So those things are like kind of fixed, which means we can't just like grep for joint in the documentation and scrub all that stuff. As much as I would like to be able to do that. So like we've had several rounds of like going and fixing a bunch of stuff, and then somebody would like, oh hey, it's there's a joint thing here, and we're oh yeah, okay, add that to the list of things to scrub, and then we'll like re-go do like not just that documentation, but like our GitHub repos looking for like those like that string,
Yeah.
So
like for instance,
someday maybe we'll be in the clear.
yeah, because like for instance, I did that just a couple days ago when I happened to be looking over the documentation and like the one of the images, and I have that image here, which is the layout. I'll get to in just a second, but you know, it still had like images.joyent.com and updates.joyent.com, right? And so I was like, oh, I can fix that.
Yeah, and cases where it's a graphic, like we can't even grep for those things.
Yeah.
Um,
Although,
yeah.
you know, Apple has improved because, for instance, like on your iPhone, if there's like a text in a photo, it can find it. So maybe that functionality will get better in some other tools.
Yeah, we might be able to do something with that.
Yeah. But
that would be cool to do. Yeah.
I was able to update that image. Shout out to Inkscape, which is a open source version of Illustrator, but you can take images and like you'd use like a trace bitmap and you can make it a SVG, all that stuff. So I was able to easily update images to be correct. And so, I'm going to keep looking out for that. It does. And I actually did again, with VS Code in the repo for documentation, I did a search for Joyent, and there's still a lot of places to update. Some of it might not make sense, right? So I have kind of left it alone, but I've tried to do multiple passes because it's not safe to just go find and replace here. It has to be, sometimes you got to change it to Triton or this or that. And so you got to be careful on what you go change, but we're trying to continue to update that. And let me just check chat really quick, just in case there's any questions in there.
Oh, we're just gabbing about the Apple like text recognition stuff.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I see that popping up. I want to make sure I address any of those. So yeah, and then the network portion of Triton, giving them internal intra-instance and external internet connectivity. So there's a NAT instance. There's fabric networking that allows you to have a virtual network that instances can talk to each other on. And so if you have, for instance, a database and a front end, the front end piece of the software can talk to the database through a completely private network that's private to your particular account. So you don't have to open up ports and things like that. The network's only reachable by instances on that network. So that's one of the cool things about Triton, is that like out of the box, it has that functionality where, as a consumer of the cloud, you can have networks that you define and use those in the way that you'd like without having to wait for somebody to provision stuff for you. You can do it, as long as the operator allows, you can do those things yourself as the consumer. So for instance, in mnx.io, you can try that out. You can go in and actually set up fabric networks in your account and then use those, give it a name, an IP address range, and then you can utilize and take advantage of that. The other thing that I didn't mention on here is CNS. So Triton CNS Container Name Service is really, really awesome. So that gives DNS names to your instances, as well as you can use things like service names. So using the tagging ability in provisioning, and you could do this post provision as well, you can give certain instances a service name. So like database, web, things like that. And then we'll actually group them together in a service like name.service.uuid, and it can do round robining DNS and things like that. And there's health checks and things. You can take instances out, but it's a really, really valuable and powerful service that we've discussed before, that gives you a really cool advantage for using DNS names. And then we've talked about it previously. I did it with HA proxy, for instance. You can use those, give it a SRV record, and it will actually go and find all the instances in there and serve them up, and then you can take them out as you would like. And HA proxy, for instance, will take them out of the pool. So there's some cool ways to combine that if you want to use DNS, or if you want to use something at another layer in conjunction with DNS. The next thing I have is just the terminology. So like I said, I'm going to be...
Before you jump ahead to that,
sure.
One more super awesome feature of Triton that I love is CMON, the container monitor. So we expose exposition metrics. So exposition is has pretty much become like the standard for metrics information gathering with most open source products. Originally, it was from Prometheus, so Prometheus style compatible metrics. You can take a Prometheus instance and point it at Triton, and it will pull in all of the metrics for all of your instances, and it's on an account basis. So each user can collect metrics for their own instances, and there's some special stuff in there for the admin account that can monitor the global zone compute nodes and the API metrics data. So yeah, one of my most favorite features of Triton is that, and then you can like hook that up with Grafana for visualization or whatever other tools. So yeah, that one.
Yeah, and I think I talk about this a little bit later. But yeah, CMON is great too. So yeah, there's some just really cool tools that we have in there to, as an operator, besides the admin portal where you can get that overview, or some of the commands like checking your services and stuff like that. CMON is just great for monitoring things, and then history data. So if you're thinking something is slow or not working correctly, if you're using CMON and grabbing those metrics and storing them, you can actually have a place to point to say like, okay, this is happening at this time. It was doing this performance, and then now over this time, it's not doing the same thing. And so it's a really valuable
or
tool.
The performance profile has changed over time. Knowing exactly when something started to get slow helps tremendously.
Yeah, and it has things like disk, right? So one of the big things that you might run into, is filling up disk. You do not want that to happen, and so there's alerts and things you can set up to if a disk is filling up, right? So there's just some things you can do to help prevent kind of catastrophic things, but as well as minor and major performance things that may happen, and you can have some place to point to and see where, are you memory bound, CPU bound, things like that. As long as you have you're grabbing the metrics and have a place to store them and visualize them, you're going to have an advantage of having exposition metrics, because there's companies who have built entire companies on checking out metrics, Datadog, Honeycomb, I can't think of the New Relic, things like that. And so this just gives you an advantage of not having to have even a third party or another piece of software, besides Prometheus and Grafana, or I can't think of the database program, but yeah, like having a time series database, you're going to have a big tool that people pay a lot for some of these things, and so CMON's a great tool.
Yeah, and even if you are already using a third-party monitoring system, having the exposition metrics available, most of those like proprietary service type things can also consume Prometheus metrics. So you can just have those things pointed right at your Triton and pull in all of the metrics for everything and use that in any other third-party tools that you're using.
And that's great, because that, like, if you have an overview of your particular software, right, you can see is the performance in the actual software, is it in Triton, things like that. So there's ways to get a nice big overview of what you're running. What I just quickly wanted to highlight was just some terminology. Like I said, I'll be posting a part of these slides. What you just might see, and this is available on the docs page as well, but terminology, the head node, the management server, and typically in a Triton installation, you do not provision instances to the head node. It is possible you can turn head node provisioning on, but in a true Triton installation, you do not want to actually do that. because you want it to be the management server. And then you have your compute nodes, the host for instances. So that's where you'll actually start provisioning instances and have things running, right, is on your compute nodes. So that's kind of that delineation there. When we talked about images in the context of Triton and SmartOS, images are what you use to provision instances, right? So they're available on, it's built into images.smartos.org, I believe, where,
Mhm.
and then Image Atom is where you can list the images. So like when you have a Triton installation or a SmartOS installation, we have images available on images.smartos.org of a bunch of things we've built, including, like I said, Linux, all that. So you would use that to get images. There's a way to build custom images, right? So operators and users can create custom images. And so a user can actually create a custom image that they want to provision from, and then operators can do that and then make them available to end users. And then we've talked about previously about the process of image creation and things like that, and we're trying to make that more open.
Yeah, users can create images from their own instances. So if you want to have a particular application pre-set up, you create a base instance, do all of your installation, get your application exactly the way that you want it, and then convert that to an image, and then you can one-click launch those things. And you can also allow users to share images with other additional users. So if you have team A and team B, and team A is building something, and team B needs to be able to utilize that, they can share that image so that the other team is able to use those images. So you can even do have an infrastructure team that builds these images and can share them that way, or give those people direct access to import images directly into Triton, so that all users are able to access them.
Yep. And then the other half of an instance provisioning is packages. So those define the resource usage. So RAM, CPU, disk. And so there's actually a set of